I guess it's part 3. How is someone that can't even keep track of the video parts of his videos going to find the treasure? I have no idea. Catcher in the Rye. Getting back to Catcher in the Rye. Very important for Forrest Fenn. Loves the book. We have a mentally fragile person who's wandering around. We have a mentally fragile person in the persona of Holden Caufield, who is wandering around New York. He's been kicked out of school. He goes back home. He's in trouble for being kicked out of school. He knows he's in trouble. He's wandering around. He's trying to get together with people and talk to them. Has a problem crossing the street. Strange, right? I didn't understand it when I read it. He essentially, when he's in the city, and he gets to this point where when he's forced to cross wants to cross the street, he becomes scared. Crossing the street starts to have this almost mythic, psychological portents for him. I'm overdoing it, but it's odd. It's like going across streets. It's like it scares him, and he feels like he's going to be kind of taken down and swallowed up. Back when I did a video where I talked about him crossing the street and step on a crack, break your mother's back, I literally had, and this is why I love you guys for your comments, I had people telling me, this has to do with the underworld, and people in the old times, if they'd step on a crack, that was like releasing the underworld, and so you didn't want to do that, and you wanted to avoid stepping on cracks in the rocks or whatever, I don't know, or in the sidewalks, I don't know, how far back does this go? Well, I guess in medieval, they didn't have sidewalks, it doesn't matter. The point I'm trying to make is, crossing the street for Forrest Fenn, crossing the street for Holden Caufield. I find that a little odd. Is there a connection? I haven't figured out what that connection is. I used to think the whole thing about crossing the streets, since he made a big deal of it, was talking about when you're going to the blaze and the treasure that you would have to cross a river. Don't ask me why that would make sense. They're two different things, a road and a river. But I thought, he's trying to tell us you're going to cross something before you get to the blaze and the treasure. Now, in my particular case, that is true. But that's not even to say, probably most of us, if we're going to find this treasure, are going to cross a road or a stream or a creek or a river. Let's face it. Okay, let me get back to the point of Catcher in the Rye that I thought was the most phenomenal thing, the most eye-opening thing. And like I said, I didn't really care for the book, but, there were two things that were eye-opening. One is just classic Forrest Fenn, and it's very much has to do with like my Howard Hughes story, where I linked the chapter about Concy and me at Grebe Lake to linking that to the Firehole River, which is in Yellowstone. So there's one thing that was just really kind of like, oh my God, of course. But then the other thing is the realization that we're following a poem. We're following a poem called The Thrill of the Chase. I'm not sure any of us really even know what that means outside of the thrill of the chase is about kind of like life and the thrill of life and following your journey, getting to the end. But it's exciting. And of course, in this case, the chase is about finding a treasure and the thrill of finding that treasure. That's what most of us think, and I think that's probably a pretty good idea. But I think it's really interesting that Catcher in the Rye, the entire book, the title, is a misnomer. Because there is no Catcher in the Rye. Nobody's catching anybody in the rye, right? If you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. Catcher in the Rye is a title that's derived by Holden Caufield. Catcher in the Rye is a line that Holden Caufield believes he hears a child on the side of the street, not going across the street, staying on the side of the street with his parents. Or there's a whole thing about that in the clip notes. What that means, he's still within the realm of his parents and hasn't grown up. So he's right on the sidewalk next to the street, but he's not going out in the street, which, going across the street means you're getting older, and this is just a child. The child is singing a Robert Burns song called Comin' Through the Rye. And in this song, this poem that's put to a song, by the way, interestingly to me, the song Comin' Through the Rye, see what I mean, folks? The song Comin' Through the Rye is sung in some versions by people, I guess in Scotland, to the tune of Old Lang Syne. The point I'm trying to make is Catcher in the Rye is a misnomer, misnamed. When the child sings, if a body catch a body coming through the rye, Holden Caufield, strangely in my opinion, envisions somebody on the edge of a cliff next to a rye field who is catching the innocent children / souls, is catching the innocent children / souls who are going over the edge of the cliff into adulthood, which is corruption, which is sin, phoniness, lust, all of that stuff. And this catcher on the edge of the cliff, a lot of people have thought there's a cliff somewhere in the Solve, in the Blaze, might be a cliff. He's catching these innocent people, children presumably, that are growing up and haven't been corrupted quite yet, going over the edge of this cliff. Only one big problem with that whole theory is that that child who sings this in the street and Holden Caufield who hears it are not hearing what the poem really says. The poem by Robert Burns says, if a body meet a body coming through the rye. And in those days, back in the 1790s, could be wrong, I'll put it up. Meet was slang for casual sex. So basically you're saying if out in the field someone has casual sex with someone else, out in the field, well, that's what they said. If you read the poem, they talk about this girl, young woman, who they can tell by her wet petticoats that she's been out in the field, and presumably she's been meeting a man or men out there. And so the poem is really asking, should that be criticized? You assume she probably is being kind of, she's been out, you can tell she's been out in the rye field, her petticoats are wet, oh my God. But keeping in mind in the older days, things like pregnancy and casual sex and all that was much, much, much more serious. I mean, pregnancy is always serious, but back in the day when it was really serious, like people would die having children and the whole family's future could be destroyed by a daughter having a kid out of wedlock and stuff. Having casual sex and stuff was much more severe ramifications than, of course, it is nowadays. So what the poet Robert Burns is really saying is, supposedly according to the experts, is he's questioning whether this should be the case. And so he's saying, if a body meet a body. Almost the exact opposite of the concept that Holden Caufield has about this person himself. His sister asked him at one point, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, I want to be the catcher in the rye. Guy's a little off. Wants to be the catcher in the rye, saving innocent souls. So anyway, folks, what does that mean? I mean, the whole point of me telling that story was just to make, when I realized that, I went, so wait a minute. Forrest Fenn points out Catcher in the Rye as being his, possibly the book he identified most with growing up. And we get the sense from reading Thrill the Chase that it was a book that he considers one of the most meaningful books in his life. And you mean to tell me that at the heart of this book, Catcher in the Rye, we have the protagonist, the hero of the story, or the character who the story kind of follows, the lead character in the story. We have him misunderstanding a poem, and we're following a poem written by Forrest Fenn to figure out where this treasure is? I was like, wow, that's kind of different, isn't it? I mean, yeah, it's kind of different. Does that mean anything? I can't help but think it does. And it makes the whole thing, to me, much deeper, in a way. Especially when we consider the fact that Forrest Fenn kind of blended in his version of crossing the street with the two biddies, and then you know that, in fact, there is a story that Holden Caufield actually starts having problems crossing the street, almost like a physical aversion. Like, if I go across the street, I'm going to be sucked down into this, bad place. It's weird. It's another one of those times when I kind of go, there's a lot more to Forrest Fenn. I think Forrest Fenn, could I almost say he's kind of he's almost trying out metaphor and analogy like some of these authors do. See, it's much easier for me to read Outlaw Trail by Robert Redford, where he just discusses the lives of the outlaws and they go and they hide in the Rocky Mountains and stuff. Much easier for me to read things like that. I'm much better at nonfiction. You get me into fiction where there's all of this meaning behind everything that happens, and you have to people have to almost explain it to me. Eric, crossing the street, that's what that's all about. I'm going, oh, seriously? Growing up? The responsibility? Okay. So that's a big deal to me, folks. That's a big deal to me. This big book for Forrest Fenn, Catcher in the Rye, the title is basically a misunderstanding. And Forrest Fenn has us at the very heart of our search, reading his poem. How much have we misunderstood his poem? I would say a lot. Because I can tell you my soul now follows the poem perfectly within a story. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. But then, before I leave it at that, I said I had 2 points. Here's the other one. This I'm talking about the thing with how I figured out the thing with Howard Hughes. And some people just didn't, they were just like, I think you're off, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. I think I'm not. And that's why. I think I'm not off, and I think that's why I'm so excited. I'm going to go out in August of this year, maybe July, because that's when the rivers are lowest. I think when Forrest Fenn went and buried hid the treasure, he did so in August, which is when he did it, August, because the rivers were low. I almost have a tendency to want to go out there in May, which is when the rivers are highest. And I was out there looking at the blaze, that rock of this different blaze. This was Forrest Fenn's, the rock at 9 Mile Hole, where I went out to Yellowstone. I found this particular rock. If you look at the water levels, the water is, I swear, is that close to the bottom of the mushroom on the rock when I was out there in May of last year. And then when you look at the old photo of Forrest Fenn's father, it's like, much less water. Real big water. I realize, folks, we're talking a difference of decades, but I'm just saying. Okay, I got to finish this up real quick. I want this to be 3 parts and no more. So, here's something very concrete, and I don't think it's a mistake. And it's in Catcher in the Rye, at the beginning of chapter 2. Forrest Fenn is talking about, like I said, he's in this situation where he's kind of touching base with people. He's rattled. He's been kicked out of school again. His mind is mush. He doesn't know what he's doing. And he goes to see this teacher, this husband, I think they're husband and wife. And they live on campus. And this is what he says. They each had their own room and all. They were both around 70 years old, or even more than that. They got a bang out of things, though, in a half-assed way, of course. I know that sounds mean to say, but I don't mean it mean. I just mean that I used to think about old Spencer, the teacher, quite a lot. And if you thought about him too much, you wondered what the heck he was still living for. I mean, he was all stooped over, and he had very terrible posture, and in class, whenever he dropped a piece of chalk at the blackboard, some guy in the first row always had to get up and pick it up and hand it to him. That's awful in my opinion. But if you thought about him just enough and not too much, you could figure it out that he wasn't doing too bad for himself. For instance, one Sunday, when some other guys and I were over there for hot chocolate, he showed us this old beat-up Navajo blanket that he and Mrs. Spencer had bought off some Indian in Yellowstone Park. You could tell old Spencer got a big bang out of buying it. That's what I mean. You take somebody old as hell like old Spencer, and they can get a big bang out of buying a blanket. So again, a reference to Yellowstone. In Catcher in the Rye, of all things. I mean, I figured Catcher in the Rye, all I knew about it was some guy in New York City, and somehow we managed to pull in Yellowstone National Park in Catcher in the Rye. And there's another reference in Catcher in the Rye where Holden Caufield says he just wants to go out west. But I think that's about it as far as other locales outside of New York City. Could be wrong. Coincidence, folks, that he's talking again about, that we're talking about Yellowstone National Park? I'll leave it up to you. In my case, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No coincidence there at all. So that's where things are at, folks. I'm extremely excited to go out, and but I want to go out when it's feasible to go out. And I don't know about May. Maybe go out and just stand there, and maybe if there, see how easy it would be to get it. I'm not saying it's difficult to get it, but I'm saying that he does say, I believe when he says. Few are brave and in the wood. I think there's something to that, and I understand it now. And we'll see when I get out there. I may have to go in May and then just go back in August or July and August if I can't get it in May. I'll see. I don't think anyone else has thought of this, so I'm not overly worried like I used to always be back when it was just maps. Because I figured everyone could see what I'm seeing, and so they're doing their version of my map, and they're going to get there before I do. I'm not so sure that's the case now, just because of the way I've taken it or the way I've come to understand it is all different. Kind of reminds me of what Forrest Fenn said. It's not that complicated, but you have to look at it. I think he said something. You have to look at it the right way, or you have to read it in the right way, or you have to understand it in the right way. I understand, if I'm correct, I understand now what he's saying. Going that route, or going my route, it's not really that complicated. It's just a whole different way of looking at it. Everybody have fun. Like I said, doors are open here in my place in Columbia, South Carolina, 72 degrees today. Cats are on the front porch. Everything's groovy. And I hope everyone's having a good time. And see you later. Goodbye.